Welcome to the Boston South Asian Coalition's event on political prisoners and refugees in South Asia. I am Pratyush from the Boston South Asian Coalition. BSAC is a South Asian-led organizing collective fighting for economic and environmental justice, gender and racial equity, and for an end to caste discrimination. We work with grassroots organizations across the world and within the subcontinent and across the diaspora. So today's event, we are organizing this event as draconian state policies have increased political prisoners and refugees in South Asia. And today's event will discuss the state of refugees and political prisoners in Bhutan, as well as in Assam in India. The first part of the event will discuss the creation of refugees and political prisoners in Bhutan. During 1990 to 92, around 100,000 people of Bhutan, which constituted 1/6 of the Bhutanese population, were evicted by the Druk regime, transported across India, and later moved to eastern Nepal. Our speaker, Kanak Dixit, and Devendra Bhattarai, who have written about this issue and have done extensive research, will discuss the state of Bhutanese refugees and political prisoners. The second half of the event will be on National Register of Citizens by Aman Vadud, and we'll talk about that after the Bhutanese presentation on Bhutan. Before we start the program, I want to mention a couple of items. Beena Sarwar, who's a very well-known famous journalist, and I will be moderating the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please post your questions in the Zoom chat. We will be selecting questions from the chat for the Q&A session. The session will be after all the three speakers have presented. This event is also on Facebook Live, so please do share the Facebook live stream in your social network. I now invite Beena Sarwar, a very well-known journalist, a South Asian peace activist, as well as the co-founder of South Asian Peace Action Network, SAPAN, to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Pratyush. I am really excited for this event and honored to be introducing these two top journalists of Nepal. And I'll start with Devendra Bhattarai, who has been associated with the Kantipur Publication for 21 years. He has been covering foreign affairs and migrant and labor and human rights issues in the Nepali publications for Kantipur. And he was in Qatar, based in Doha, for nearly 2 years, as a result of which, and then in Delhi for 4 years as a bureau chief. But his time in Doha led to his book called Registan Diary. Registan, for those who don't know, means desert. Registan Diary, based on migrant workers, in the stories of the migrant workers in the Gulf countries. And he's also written a literary book called Shrastha Ras Samaya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that profiles 85 senior literary figures in Nepal and was awarded one of Nepal's highest honors. And the refugee crisis and that he's been following, because he grew up close to the refugee camp in Damak Jhapa, and he's been following this issue of political prisoners and refugees for the last couple of decades. And I know from my friend Dilrukshi Himandante in Sri Lanka that he has also been helping her with a story she is doing on the issue. So we're really honored and excited to have him with us. And Kanak, what can I say about you? Kanak, I have known since I was a very young journalist. He has guided me through a lot of my work. My vision of South Asia also owes a lot to Kanak. For those of you who don't know Kanak, he's a very well-known writer and journalist in Nepal, a civil rights and democracy activist. He's really, really active actually in the political fight for democracy in Nepal right now. And he sees all these issues as interlinked with issues of urban open spaces, conservations of built heritage. He's helped to revive Nepal's only bus company, and he's working on applying the concept of public transportation to the valley, which is so important for democratic values, for democracy. He's also a longtime trekker, and I still remember the time he fell off a cliff and we didn't know where he was for, I don't know, 2-3 days. He suffered a serious spinal injury at that time, as well as other things. I don't know how he survived. It's actually really a miracle how he survived. And he survived, came back, and not only is he okay again, he's trekking again, and he started a spinal injury center in Nepal, which was inaugurated by Sir Edmund Hillary. And in Devendra, he's also involved in literary issues, like he's heading the main archives of the Nepali language in Kathmandu. And from him, I first heard the term penumbra, which many of you might know who are into the sciences. Penumbra is the soft shadow of the moon that is not hard, that is not that doesn't have hard boundaries. So the South Asian penumbra, like we need to in South Asia, we have similar issues, and this is something that he has, been working on for a long time. The South Asian-ness. He started Himal South Asia, of which I'm also honored to be one of the founding editors. It's a South Asian magazine now based coming out of Colombo, and also started the South Asian Film Festival, Film South Asia, for documentaries. There's a lot about him, a lot more I could say, because I've known him for over 20, almost 30 years maybe. But I'm really excited to have both of them there. I know they do amazing work. It takes a lot of courage to do the kind of work they're doing, being based where they're based. So I'll just hand it over to Pratyush to take it from there, or invite the speakers. I don't know who's going first.
Thanks a lot, Beena. Thank you for your kind introductions. So we would like to invite Kanakji first to present, and followed by Devendra. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratyush, and thank you, Beena, for that introduction. And thanks to the Boston South Asia Coalition for organizing this very important event, because it's important because the topics go unspoken and unchallenged at a global level. The issue relating to the Bhutanese refugees and Bhutanese political prisoners on the one hand, and prisoners in Assam on the other. So I'll get right down to the topic. And the way Devendra and I have divided the topic is he's been recently covering and in fact breaking the story of political prisoners unbeknownst to the rest of the world, including the rest of South Asia, political prisoners in Bhutan. And I will go back to an article I wrote in 1992 about the refugees that were actually being generated even as that article was being written, published in July-August issue of Himal, 1992. Because I feel the need to go back to that article, because as I reread it recently, I have not found any reason to change a word in that particular long form article. And this presentation by me, and also I'm sure by Devendra, is bound to be critical of the Bhutanese policies as implemented by the Bhutanese state and the Thimphu administrators. So before I go any further, I must say, for the sake of perspective, that all of our South Asian societies, South Asian countries have issues. We are highlighting the ones that relate to Bhutan at this point. But whether we talk about human rights challenges, majoritarianism, marginalization of communities, these are extant all over South Asia. But what is unique about Bhutan is that Bhutan, in a way, gets away with it. People don't talk about it. People would like to keep Bhutan in this Shangri-La status that not even Bhutan, that we need to have a place a go-to place for peace and quiet and spiritual and environmental sustainability. And so we relegate Bhutan to that particular shelf, and therefore do not question the wrong that has been committed by the Bhutanese state administration. Partly also because Bhutan is so good at so much of what it does. Bhutan as a state, as a government, as a society. If you look at the way Bhutan does diplomacy, the way it speaks and talks environmentalism, the way in the most recent times, how it has tackled the COVID pandemic. In every way, Bhutan seems to do things the way we think a government should. And this is my point. So when it comes time to depopulate, when it decides to depopulate, Bhutan depopulates with the ruthless efficiency that other societies would look at in a way in awe. And it gets away with it. And this is where I think the best way for me to summarize what I'm about to share with you is I reread my article, and the first 3 paragraphs essentially is an intro to what I'm about to expand upon later. So this is The Dragon Bites Its Tail, Himal, July, August 1992. Traveling east on the highway from Siliguri to Guwahati, looking north, the green of the Indian flatlands gives way to the blue hills of Bhutan. Beyond the low-lying monsoon clouds, up in the Bhutanese districts of Samchi, Chirang, Gelefu, unfolds a story of cultures in collision. A ruling minority feels threatened that its identity is about to be swamped by a growing majority. It decides to counter this threat by a well-planned program of depopulation. The rulers know the world very well. They are astute and use every available advantage: the remoteness of their country, the manipulable media, the weakness of all outsiders for the quote-unquote last remaining Shangri-La, and the blessings of a giant southern neighbor, that is India, that obligingly turns a blind eye. The country is Druk, land of the thunder dragon. The guardians of the Jongha language and the Drukpa Kagyu tradition of West Bhutan have decided to protect their identity, and the losers are the Nepali speakers of the south. The large-scale suffering of southerners, Lotsampas in Jongha, has yet to make a mark, even in the subcontinental consciousness. The story remains largely unreported. Thimphu zealously guards its image, and the little it has allowed to leak to the world media has been through the eyes of the carefully vetted journalists and academics. Many are therefore surprised to learn that Bhutan is home to communities other than the Ngalang Drukpas of West Bhutan, and that there are Nepali speakers in such large numbers. Coffee table books, etc. What I go on to say there is that coffee table books about Bhutan and its touristic treasures do not refer to the Lotsampa and only mildly to the Sarchaps of eastern Bhutan. They focus mostly on the Ngalung community, which is the ruling, which makes up, contributes to the ruling elite of Bhutan. So beyond what I read to you, the issue with Bhutan essentially is that there is a country in the world that has depopulated 1/7 of its population. The country might be small, the population might be small, but in relative terms, the viciousness required to depopulate 1/7 of your population, some would say 1/6 of your population, is something that requires accountability, that requires justice, howsoever long it may take for that justice, the process of justice to come around and be implemented. The 2005 census of Bhutan. Earlier, Bhutan had claimed 1 million population when it got admitted to the United Nations. So it was thought that the population was around 1 million, but the 2005 census puts it at about 6.7 lakh. The reason I mention is because it should have been at least 7.7 lakh. 100,000 plus, 107,000 to begin with, and then with births in exile, the figure went up to about 1,20,000. But these are the refugees. How did this happen? How did Thimphu, to use a mildly harsh term, get away with it? I think it's important to list some reasons, some which came in my summary of my article. One is just smart management of foreign policy for the purpose of your state and of your government. An ability to essentially bamboozle the rest of the world about the reality of who the refugees were, how they were regarded as citizens till the point that they were ousted. The use of the Shangri-La trope with the invasion of Tibet by China, starting in 50, ending in the coup de grace in 1959, the world which knew about Shangri-La from James Hilton, even though the term Shangri-La actually doesn't exist on the ground, but the idea of a Shangri-La, which connects more with the actual Himalayan Buddhistic term Beul. So the search for a Beul, even though the world thought it was looking for Shangri-La, and that Tibet was taken, so Bhutan slipped in to take on the image of this Tibetan Buddhist kingdom in the clouds. And so that naturally gave Bhutan a kind of a protecting, a Teflon, a cultural Teflon that protected it when it needed protection most, quote unquote, which is when it started depopulating and kicking out the Nepali speaking Lotsampa. The contributory factors include India's connivance, the Indian state's connivance, or rather New Delhi's connivance, because when the refugees exited Bhutan, they went into India because Nepal doesn't have a land border with Bhutan. And then they were essentially shipped out of India in trucks into Southeast Nepal, into the Jhapa district of East Nepal. I remember as the refugees came out, this particular lot of refugees in 1990, early 1992, had come out from to the town of Garganda in India and had been shipped out. And there they were camped by the banks of the Mai Khola. And I remember so well looking at these refugees. They were essentially poor householders that had been ejected. And the kind of things that they had collected to bring with them were little thatch items, trunks of the kind, wooden trunks and tin trunks of the kind you see in poor household in the hills of Nepal, likewise in the hills of Sikkim or in Bhutan. And the Bhutanese Nepalis, because they had left in a century earlier, starting a century earlier, their mannerisms had departed from the mannerisms of Nepali speakers within Nepal, because they had gone into a time warp. So you actually saw Nepalis, the way the extreme graciousness, humility, whatever you may call it, the style of dress, the style of talking, reminded you of what Nepal might have been at an earlier age. I remember the complete fecklessness and a whole population group that was lost. They didn't know what had happened to them. Well, what had happened to them was a state policy that was very well crafted, that was meant to scare the daylights out of the southerners of Bhutan, so that they just felt they had to leave. Some use of violence, some rape, some killings, but by and large, it is a fierce psychosis that was built up. by a very capable machinery, which all said and done was led by King Jigme Singh Wangchuk. While as with all kings, sometimes people tend to blame the acolytes and the administrators, but essentially Bhutan had not yet begun its democratizing activities of the last couple of decades. So back then, essentially the king was in command. And one has to say, sadly, that the depopulation exercise happened under the command of King Jigme. And the other contributory factor had to do with the absolute political chaos, continuing political chaos within Nepal, which kept Nepal from focusing on Bhutan as a problem and therefore sensitizing the world about what was going on. To begin with, Nepal is an insular country. It not having been colonized, it functions in the Nepali language. It doesn't feel the need to reach out, even with its own problems. And when it comes to a problem with the Bhutanese refugees, Nepali society was not able to do the kind of sensitizing of the world community that some other society might have. And then the political weaknesses, of the political leadership in Nepal. To give you an example, the present Prime Minister of Nepal was then Home Minister, and he went to Bhutan, and he came away with agreeing with Bhutan on categorization of the refugees who were already in the Nepali camps. And that categorization made no sense at all. It says some who had left of their own free will, and as Bhutan claims, some of them who have criminal record, as if it matters to Nepal that the Bhutanese refugees are criminals or not, because that is Bhutan's affair. Likewise, 4 categories were created, and Nepal accepted those categories, which in a way implied that Nepal was accepting the Bhutanese definition of what had happened. This is how Nepal played a contributory role in terms of in terms of not being able to react to the refugee problem as it gained momentum. Now, I will not go into details of why this all happened, other than to say that the Nepalis have been exiting, Nepali speakers, or if not even Nepali speakers, people from the Nepali hills have been departing these hills for the east and for the west, ever since Nepal became a country that was producing poverty, going back to the times of the imperialist wars conducted by the Kathmandu state in trying to gain more lands to the east and west. It created pauperization among the populace. So the people, Nepalis have been moving out. That is the push factor. There are other push factors as well. The pull factor was during British India, they needed labor for cutting lumber for tea plantations eastwards. The British also needed soldiers, and Nepalis complied and joined the British Gorkhas. But that does not concern us for now. Essentially, I think I have another 5 minutes perhaps, Pratyush, so I will end. I'll try to come to a conclusion for now. So this pull factor also meant that the Nepali speakers entered Bhutan by express invitation of the Bhutanese state. At that time, the southern Bhutan was essentially the area that was under the control of the former Prime Minister, Jigme Palden Dorji. This was a family based in Kalimpong, but had links across southern Bhutan, and they had a role in settling southern Bhutan. Why were they to be settled? Because southern Bhutan was essentially unsettled, malarial, forested area, but the Bhutanese government would get revenue. So for the sake of revenue, the Nepali speakers were allowed in, or the people from the mid-hills of Nepal, migrants, were allowed in. Essentially, the issue is that people who were regarded as citizens by the Bhutanese state, including after the 1958 Citizenship Act, where suddenly by the time the late 1980s came around, the Bhutanese state seems to have decided that we are going to be overwhelmed by the Nepalese. And what happened in Sikkim is going to happen to us as well. One can understand the fear of cultural inundation, but what the Bhutanese state did is what is problematic, which is a depopulation exercise. People who you regarded as citizens were suddenly made non-citizens. It's a long process, something known as the Driglam Namja, which is a cultural process of bringing everybody under one cultural umbrella that is defined by Western Bhutan, the Ngalang Society of Northwest Bhutan. Essentially, it was an attempt to ram that cultural oneness on the Nepalese as well as some other communities. That created some reaction, and things snowballed, and the Bhutanese government, essentially with the king leading the charge, decided to correct the demographic imbalance. This is the exact words of the then Foreign Minister Dawa Chiring, that they would stop this campaign once they had corrected the cultural imbalance. And so what happened to the refugees thereafter? I'll now compress what I need to say. A few things remain to be said. The Bhutanese refugees went into the camps in Nepal and stayed there for nearly 20 years. Nobody was giving them their due weight as a large refugee community. Even UNHCR, in its public information documents, tended not to highlight the Bhutanese refugees too much. And as I wrote in one of my articles, it was clear that the Bhutanese refugees had no support other than bits and pieces of fragmented sympathizers here and there, including in India, but no support. Nepal, Kathmandu state was feckless. India was unwilling, particularly because Bhutan was its sacrosanct Himalayan region that Indian state functionaries are so paranoid about and have been since the 1962 debacle. And so they want Bhutan as it is, let it be. And so they were not at all going to be responsive to the plight of the refugees. So as I wrote in my article, it was clear that the Bhutanese refugees were going to slowly disappear into the South Asian night. This had happened earlier when Nepali speakers fled Burma and came into Nepal and parts of India, and essentially there was nobody speaking for them. Same was going to happen with the Bhutanese, 100,000 and 120,000 by the end of it. But what happened, interestingly, is that at the end of it all, 9/11 happened. 2001, 9/11, suddenly the United States refugee intake machinery went dry. They needed a group of quote unquote docile refugee group, but a large number. And so incredibly in Geneva, the UN, at the United Nations in Geneva, the US representative said, we are willing to take 60, 70,000, maybe even more. And that is what happened. The Americans started an intake. Bhutanese refugees went into third country resettlement. For a while, there was a danger because there were because there was no way that the Bhutanese state, as things stood, and as I have explained, would have taken the refugees back. So better to survive in a third country and have your children perhaps rise to the occasion to challenge Bhutan in terms of accountability. And this is where I will end my initial remarks to say that Bhutanese refugees, surprisingly today, are all over the world in the Western capitals and Western cities. And because I also, being a kind of a human rights activist, I always believe in accountability, reparation, memorialization. And I believe the Bhutanese refugees, the Lotsampa, are deserving of all three attributes of what some would call transitional justice, which is accountability for what was done, memorialization so we do not forget, and reparation for what was done. Because these were citizens of Bhutan that were ousted without due process, and a cruelty that is one of the largest episodes of cruelty in recent times that has gone unremarked in the world. I thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Kanakji, for an excellent historical and political background of the refugees from, of Nepali-speaking refugees in Bhutan. And I just want to point out in the chat that was pointed out in the chat by Beena as well, is that Kanakji, who has been the founder editor of Himal, has covered this topic, and there is there's a link to the article and many other articles that have been there in his magazine. So we'll move on to the next speaker, who Beena has already introduced. Devendraji, who is an investigative journalist also and has written extensively on this topic, will give us more detail about this refugee crisis, as well as the increase in political prisoners of Nepali origin from Bhutan. Devendraji.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Bhutan South Asian Coalition for this good initiative. Actually, I don't want to go to the so much detail or background, because Kanak sir has wrote so many things and background on the issues. I have pointed out some my own feelings and my concerns on the issues. I have been following these issues with keen interest since last 20 years. The reason behind my interest was because of my home is very close to one of the main refugee camp in Jhapa, Damak. It's a Beldang camp. Every time I visit my hometown, I make sure that I visit Beldang camp to meet some of the elders whom I have known most of my life. And I have some friends there too. And sometimes for my clues for my new story as well. In my last trip to Beldang camp in past 2 years, I came across some returnees who had been in prison for nearly 20 years or so. Then I started digging into it, and started verifying the information that I had gathered. The more I got involved, the more I got more information. Then I reached out to the family members and prisoners, of which most of them who are in the Bhutanese refugee camp, and some were also in Canada, US, or European countries, right? I reached out to them through email and telephones. One of the crucial important breakthrough was after I came across Mr. Ram Karki, the global campaign for the release of political prisoners in Bhutan. He's the co-editor based in Hague. So through him, I could get more information and cross-verify the list that I have received. After receiving the confirmation, I then reached to ICRC to cross-verify the information. Through ICRC, I came to know that the relatives had been visiting the prisoners thrice a year. After that, I did research on Bhutan Democratic Transformation and National Happy Index slogan. So based on these issues, I started analyzing the situation, and based on the field research from my interviews with family of members, then I started writing series of articles. For this, I got support from my own publication, Kantipur, and the Center for Investigative Journalism, Nepal. And I have some concerns regarding the issues, because most of you are aware on these issues, which we have written in Kantipur and the translation in the Nepal Times. What I feel is that why the international community is silent of these grave issues of human rights, but only promoting the happy index of Bhutan government I just cannot figure it out. What could be the reason behind it? I just want to, put this issue on debate. Interestingly, most of the prisoners already had Bhutanese refugees ID card, or they were already registered by the UNHCR, and their ID card has been renewing even today. For example, Omnath Adhikari has been languishing in Chengbang jail for nearly 14 years. His ID number is, UNHCR ID number is Beldangi 2nd C3104. And they were charged with extremist terrorist charge for the treason. And also they were arrested in Indian territory. And ICRC has proven his status with political prisoner. And his ICRC registration number is 455. This is one example of contradiction. I can give you an example. Refugee Loknath Acharya, who was followed from Damak Jhapa and later arrested in Siliguri, India, and his whereabouts is unknown, still unknown. An unconfirmed report is that he's in Rabuna jail, an army center. But ICRC also cannot confirm the report because even ICRC doesn't have the permission to visit the prison except the central jail, Chengbang. That too has been stopped since last nearly 10 years. It is such a grave issue, but why is international community mum in these issues? So I want to, raise these issues through my paper, through my work. With the resettlement of more than 100,000 Bhutanese refugees, the international community says that this issue has been resolved, but more than 7,000 plus individuals who have not been able to reunite with the family, and all the organizations, including UNHCR, have abandoned them. If you look at it from the humanitarian ground, it's indeed a very sad reality. Why is the international community silent on this? So I wanted to, raise these issues through my investigative work on political prisoners. So actually, I'm so much thankful to this Boston South Asian coalition, so that it can, debate on international forum as well. So my points are like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Devendraji, for excellent presentation, and thanks for all your investigative work that you have done on this issue, which has brought international spotlight on the state of Bhutanese refugees and political prisoners. And what is interesting is that and also sad is that this thread runs to India in terms of not only the connection of how the government treated the people from Bhutan, who were temporarily in India, or they passed through India as they went to Nepal, is also the issue of the National Register of Citizens, as well as the Citizenship Amendment Act. So with that, I would like to move on to the second part of our event, which is on the National Register of Citizens, NRC, and the political prisoners in Assam, India. After the Indian government implemented the draconian and discriminatory National Register of Citizens in Assam, almost 2 million people were not included in the NRC and became stateless. If the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens are implemented all over India, as is the plan, the most vulnerable, the landless Dalits, the Muslim migrant laborers, women, transgender people, Adivasis, the indigenous, will suffer the most. Our speaker is very knowledgeable about this because he has been active on this issue for a long time. And Aman Wadud has worked with the people impacted by NRC in Assam. I would like to invite Saeed, an activist of the Boston South Asian Coalition, to introduce our next speaker. Saeed.
Thank you, Pratyush, for this wonderful introduction of mine. This is much appreciated. So it is a matter of immense pride and pleasure for me to welcome renowned human rights lawyer and social activist, Mr. Aman Wadud, on this platform today. Many of us know of Aman well, but for those who do not, here is a little introduction about him. Aman Wadud is a human rights lawyer from the state of Assam in India. He litigates before the Guwahati High Court. He mostly defends people accused of being illegal migrants and those who are detained in various detention centers of Assam. He has represented several detainees and has gotten them released after several years in detention. Aman has extensively worked during the infamous NRC, short for National Register of Citizens, process of the Indian government. And I think Pratyush explained this a little bit more when he talked. Aman traveled to various districts of Assam to educate people about the NRC. He has been organizing training programs for lawyers who work before the Foreigners Tribunal in Assam. In 2019, Aman co-founded the Justice and Liberty Initiative to provide pro bono legal aid to underprivileged people whose citizenship has been wrongly questioned. In March of 2020, the Justice and Liberty Initiative petitioned before the Supreme Court of India for the release of all declared foreigners detained in Assam. The Supreme Court then reduced the detention period from 3 years to 2 years and reduced the financial bond from rupees 1 lakh, which is 100,000, to rupees 5,000. Also, these efforts resulted in the release of about 350 detainees from various detention centers until now. Aman has been extensively campaigning against arbitrary deprivation of nationality and statelessness in Assam. In March 2020, Aman testified before the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. on its hearing on citizenship laws. Recently, Aman started an initiative of setting up Samvidhan Kendras, translated constitution centers, across Assam to explain the Indian Constitution to the common people. These centers also function as free legal aid clinics, providing access to justice to people whose citizenship has been questioned. Aman is currently a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Texas School of Law. Aman, over to you now, and thank you for the wonderful work you have been doing for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saeed Bhai, for this very kind introduction. Thank you so much, Boston South Asian Coalition, for giving me this opportunity to come and speak along with two very illustrious and prominent speakers. I'm deeply grateful to everyone for giving me this opportunity. After listening to my two predecessor speakers, one thing is sure that the lack of empathy of the government towards its citizens. Although my topic is not precisely on political prisoners, the conventional definition of political prisoners or refugees, but I will try to explain how Indian citizens, for vested political interests, are being rendered stateless. I will start with sharing a few brief facts, because this is a very complex issue and it is important to know the background of the issue. I have limited time, around 15 minutes, so I will speak a little faster. I hope I'm audible to everyone, and yeah, thank you so much. So I start here. So Assam came under the British regimes after the Yandabu Treaty in 1826. The migration of Muslim peasants started in the 19th century. My great grandfather migrated in 1870s, when, of course, India was still the Bengal was not even partitioned right then. After the partition of Bengal, Assam was came under the East Bengal province for around 6 years, and the capital of Assam was Assam province was Dhaka, and before it was reunited in 1911. And during this period, British promoted migration of peasants and mostly Muslims to Assam to grow more foods. By 1931, according to the census superintendent, he says more than 500,000 people migrated to Assam. But Radha Kamal Mukherjee, in his seminal book called Changing Face of Bengal, he's an agrarian historian. He says between 1900 and 1930, at least 1 million Bengali peasants went to Assam and brought new land under cultivations. Of course, there was no border till 1947, and migration within the was within the territory of British India. In 1951, the Muslim population of Assam was 24.7%. After the independence, there was a lot of arbitrary evictions that led to reverse migration. A lot of people who migrated here before the independence migrated back to East Pakistan then, but a lot of people were arbitrarily evicted from India. And then there was a language movement in the 1960s. So Bengali Muslims who migrated long before the independence, they assimilated with the Assamese language, and they voted for Assamese language, and that's how Assamese become the official language of Assam. But despite that, quit India notices were being sent to Indian citizens arbitrarily. That led to a lot of petition from the minority communities, and which eventually gave rise to the formation of the Foreigners Tribunal, which I will come later on. In 1979, the Assam movement started basically from one district called Mongoldoy, where the Lok Sabha election was scheduled, and there was a report that a lot of people illegally migrated to this place, and their names has been enrolled in the voter list. So that Assam movement went on for 6 long years. This was basically to throw out so-called illegal migrants. In 1983, IMDT Act, Illegal Migration Determination of Tribunal Act, was brought in to detect so-called foreigners, and the burden of proof was on the state and not on the person who is accused of being foreigner. 1985 Assam Accord brought an end to the Assam movement, and 6A was added to the Citizenship Act, which basically created a new cutoff date for the state of Assam, which is 25th March 1971. So anyone who came before that date is an Indian citizens, according to the section 6A of the just a minute, I just get it out. Yeah, I think this will be better. So the legislation which determines the citizenship is the Foreigners Act, and this is a colonial act which was brought during the Second World War to deal with people who were coming to India during that World War. And the burden of proof was on the person who is accused of being foreigner. So this is a wartime legislation, according to which actually the people who are regarded as foreigners, this act was meant for them and not for usual Indian citizens. And I will explain how this is being now used to wage a war on the Indian citizens. So another legislation is the Foreigners Tribunal. This is an executive order, not a and a legislation which is passed by the parliament. So according to this order talks about setting up foreigners tribunal, and initially it was said that the member who will head this tribunal should have judicial experience, but subsequently it was diluted, and now lawyers with 7 years of experience are appointed as foreigners tribunal member. So basically, in Assam, according to Assam Accord, there should be detection, deletion from the voter list, and deportation. So because of that, there are investigation agencies who are supposed to accuse people of being illegal migrants. So there are two agencies which accuse people of being illegal migrant, and one is Assam Border Police Organization. These are not stationed at the border. Assam Border Police is a part of the Assam Police, which is present in all police stations across Assam, and it accuses people of being illegal migrant without an investigation. And I say this with all responsibility. Example: Army man Sanaullah, he served the Indian Army for 30 years. Ajmal Haq served Indian Army for 30 years. They were accused of being illegal migrant without any investigation whatsoever. Sanaullah, when the day he was accused of being illegal migrant, he was serving in the Indian Army. He was stationed or posted in Manipur for a counter-insurgency program called Hifazat, when he was accused of being illegal migrant. Several years later, he was sent notice. He submitted 26 documents and he failed to prove his citizenship. Another agency is Election Commission of India. Their job is more easier. They just take out the voter list and just mark people as doubtful voter. Absolutely no investigation whatsoever. And fair investigation, fair trial is a part of fundamental right. And this is a gross violation of fundamental right of how Indian citizens are accused of being foreigners. When these cases are adjudicated before the foreigners tribunal, there is a presumption of non-citizenship. How, as I talked about the Illegal Migration Determination Tribunal, which was brought in 1983, where the burden of proof was on the state. So that was challenged by Sarabando Sonowal, who was the chief minister before this, and currently a cabinet minister. So the Supreme Court set aside this act largely based on S.K. Sinha report. S.K. Sinha was the former governor of Assam, and I read, if you see the last para, he wrote in his report that the influx of this illegal migrant is turning this district into a Muslim majority region. He's talking about the Muslim dominated district of Assam. It will then only be a matter of time when demand for the merger with Bangladesh will be made. The rapid growth of international Islamic fundamentalism may provide for driving force for this demand. Now, this report, which is a bigoted report, was brought in 1998. Supreme Court largely relied on this report, extensively quoted from this report to come to a conclusion that there is a large-scale illegal migration from Bangladesh. And it said that Assam is facing an external aggression and internal disturbance. Very shockingly, on the point of internal disturbance, S.K. Sinha wrote that because of illegal migration, the militancy in northeastern states started. If you read any scholars, no one has ever mentioned about this region that because of so-called illegal migration, militancy started. So completely based on false premises, an act was set aside, and then Foreigners Act was brought into being in Assam to decide cases of Indian citizens. So because of this statement, because of the observation made in the Supreme Court judgment, the cases which are decided before the Foreigners Tribunal, a fair trial is denied. I cannot go into the details, but I'll just give you some example. So basically, there is a selective application of evidence law, and you may lose your citizenship because of spelling error, typographical mistake, or minor contradiction in the name, in the age, and your name. Whoever is watching this part of this webinar, please check your documents, your father's documents, your grandfather's documents, and please tell me if those documents are error-free. Every document will have an error. I just give one example. This is an part of the amnesty report designed to exclude. You can Google it and find it out. The entire story is written there. So a person whose name was Abu Bakr Siddiq, his grandfather's name was Afer Ali, but in one document it was written as APER, in another it was written as AFER, and that became the reason for losing his citizenship. There is a huge political pressure, executive pressures on the foreigners tribunal who execute this this cases, citizenship cases, adjudicate these citizenship cases. And in 2017, 19 foreigners tribunal members were that their job was terminated because they are on contractual basis, and the reason was given that they could not perform well, and the parameter for underperformance was that they could not declare as many people as foreigner as the other people whose jobs were continued. So basically the bottom line is that Indian citizens are being declared as foreigners. Till now, this is the latest figure is December 2021, as we were told that 2 million people, I will explain it to you in 1 minute about the 2 million people. Without that, apart from the 2 million people, 143,466 people have been stripped of the citizenship. They have been rendered stateless, and many of them were detained or are being detained in detention center. Go to the next. One of the reason, another reason for losing of course citizenship is, most of the peoples are poor. Ajmal and Sanaullah are one of those privileged peoples who are accused of being illegal migrant. Most of the people are poor. They don't have access to lawyer. They don't they don't have that much of resources to engage any lawyers. And lawyers also take they do not have adequate skill. Not all lawyers are very skilled, because not all good lawyers go before this foreigners tribunal and defend these cases. So that become one reason to lose citizenship. There is also inherent gender bias, because women again who gets married before 18 years of age, they lose the most important document, which is the voter list, because when they go to the matrimonial home, their name is recorded with their husband and not with their parents. And voter list is a public document, which is one of the most important documents to prove their citizenship. And that's how there is an inherent gender bias against women. So when you lose your citizenship, what is the consequences? The consequences is detention. People who are declared as foreigners are detained in detention center. There are 6 detention center, and detention center came into being in 2009. The legal home to detain people is Section 4 of the Foreigners Act. And once you are detained, you don't have right to parole and minimum wage. What happens when you are convicted for any crime? Then you are entitled to a lot of benefits, including parole and minimum wage, where if you work, in the jail premises for handicraft and all, you are paid a very minimum wage. These facilities are not given to these detainees. There are 6 detention centers in Assam, and these are housed in jail premises, in district jail. But guess what? Asia's largest and world's 2nd largest detention center has come up in Assam, which has the capacity to hold 3,000 inmates. And till now, the cost has been 64 crore Indian rupees. And because it was bringing a lot of bad press, almost from New York Times to Al Jazeera, everyone has done documentary on these detention centers. So because the name apparently is bringing bad name to Assam, they have changed its name to transit camp, apparently to humanize. Now, there is an indefinite detention because you cannot deport these peoples. So what happens when you detain a so-called declared foreigners after stripping the citizenship for these minor anomalies in the name and age, you cannot deport that person. To deport a person, there should be a country of origin, and the country of origin should confirm the nationality of that person. Then only you can deport that person. When you declare your own citizen as foreigner, strip their citizenship, why will any country accept or confirm the nationality? That will never happen. So under such circumstances, the people who have been declared as foreigner, which the figure is 143,000, they cannot be deported. The formal process of deportation started on 13/3/2013. Since then, only 5 to 6 people declared foreigners have been deported. I'm surprised how did they deport these 5 to 6 so-called declared foreigners. So when you and the other figure is 329 who actually came to illegally migrated to Assam, and they have been convicted and then detained in the detention centers. Bangladesh is accepting them because these peoples are then Bangladesh national. They can be deported, and the figure is 329. This 5-6 also includes this 329. They are called convicted foreigners. Convicted foreigners can be deported, but declared foreigners cannot be deported because they are Indian citizens. Because they cannot be deported, this gave rise to an indefinite detention situation. People like Momiron Nessa, Dilip Biswas, and Ramani Biswas and their 2 children, they were detained in 2010 and were released in 2019 after a petition was filed before the Supreme Court by Mr. Harsh Mandar, and the Supreme Court said that you cannot detain people indefinitely, and the detention period, there was a limitation cap put, which was 3 years, and 2 people should vouch for them, give surety of 1 lakh each. That's how people will be released. We went to the Supreme Court in 2020 during the pandemic, and we said that these people during the pandemic should be released. The Supreme Court was pleased to reduce the detention period from 3 to 2 years, and the bond from the financial bond from 1 lakh to 5,000. I believe that everyone should have been released because you cannot deport them. I really wonder what the purpose is serving in detaining these people. And peoples are literally dying there. In the last 3 years, 30 detainees have died in detention centers, and their bodies were handed over to Indian citizens because all these people, 143,000 people, their family members are Indian citizens. Their parents are Indian citizens. There are rare occasions where 1 or 2 person, more than 1 person have been declared as foreigner in the one family. So this entire thing, because they are not foreigner, because they are Indian citizens, and their citizenship is stripped, this is giving rise to a situation of statelessness. We are sitting on the cusp of a major statelessness crisis. And then in between all these, in 2014, NRC was started. Now, what is an NRC? NRC was a mass citizenship scrutiny process where every citizen, including newborn, had to submit that document to prove their citizenship. Documents prior to 25th March 1971, 33 million people resident of Assam had to submit this document. And this NRC was started basically justifying large-scale illegal migration to Assam, and largely quoting from the Sonwal judgment, from the S.K. Sinha, which is a report, which is a bigoted report. The entire process was very harsh, very complex. You must have read report how people, in fear of losing citizenship, committed suicide. And there was several round of verification. People had to travel 400 to 500 kilometers to prove this, to submit their document. During travel, also a lot of people lost their life. Again, women and children were the vulnerable groups. The cost was 602 crores, according to government report. But the cost that was incurred by the people in procuring document, in running from one part of the state to another part, was unimaginable. And who are these people, like I said, who are eligible to be included in the National Register of Citizens, whose names are there in the electoral roll or any document before midnight of 25th March 1971. The outcome, after 4 years of process, various rounds of scrutiny and verification, 1.9 million people have been excluded. Now, parents in and children out is a phenomenon, including my cousins whose parents are in the citizenship list, and the children did not find the name in the citizenship list, and they will have to prove the citizenship. Because Supreme Court said that there is a large-scale illegal migration, all these years we have been told that there are millions of people, like 5 to 6 million or 7 million figure has been thrown out, that this is the number of illegal migrant residing in Assam. After several years of scrutiny and verification, I would say only 1.9 million people have been excluded from the list. NRC actually busted the myth of illegal migration in Assam. Now, people who have been excluded from the list, they will get an opportunity to appeal their rejection order before the Foreigners Tribunal. They have not been rendered stateless till now, but there is a question mark on their citizenship and they will have to prove their citizenship. The citizenship list was published on 31st August 2019, and we thought that within a week or within a month, they will be allowed to prove their citizenship before the foreigners tribunal. But guess what? The number was apparently less, not adequate according to the expectations. And organizations who all these decades wanted NRC, wanted this kind of process, started saying that we do not accept this NRC. We are not happy with this NRC. The current Assam Chief Minister, he continuously spoke, I quote him, but the people of Assam are not happy because the number of exclusion is going to be much below than expected. For us, the game is not ever, we will continue to fight. He also said that the Assam government has not accepted the NRC. The government of Assam and the BJP has requested that the Home Minister Amit Shah reject the NRC. So basically, they want another round of NRC in Assam. And to achieve that goal, they started putting blame on the state coordinator, who is an IS officer, Pratik Hajela, who was then shifted to Madhya Pradesh. And in his place, a person called Hitesh Dev Sharma was brought in as state coordinator. And guess what? In 2017, he wrote on his Facebook page that lakhs and lakhs of Bangladeshis are in the NRC. He also wrote that minority appeasement policy for the last 7 decades has changed the definition of secularism. This person is now heading the NRC process. He subsequently went and filed an application, 2 applications before the Supreme Court to basically reopen the NRC or another round of NRC or 100% verification of the NRC. So in the guard of so-called re-verification, there is an attempt for another round of NRC in Assam. The bottom line is that because there is the politics, because of politics in Assam, which is against so-called illegal migrants, the Bengali Muslims and Bengali Hindus are seen as an outsider, are not seen as Assamese enough. Because of this politics, people are losing their citizenship. They are getting detained, like I mentioned, although this does not come under the conventional meaning of political prisoners, but thousands of people still now have been detained. Right now, the number of detainees are around or less than 200 because of these 2 Supreme Court orders. But it is because of this politicization that people are losing their citizenship, getting stateless, becoming stateless in their own beloved motherland, and detained in detention center. Till now, the last 2 elections was on the issue of so-called illegal migration. After this 4 or 5 decades of this entire politicization started, still we are talking about these issues. There is hardly any talk about development, and the entire thing is on so-called illegal migrants. This is basically the entire story of Assam and how people are getting rendered stateless and getting detained in detention center. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thanks a lot, Amanji, for doing an excellent presentation on NRC and the ensuing situation in Assam. It is also important to understand the historical background of NRC and how it's impacting, millions of people from Assam and are likely to impact the rest of India when CA and NRC are implemented all over India. The Bhutan Southasian Coalition has organized multiple protests on the implementation of NRC, and we will continue to engage with this issue. Before we start the Q&A session, we want to announce that the Bhutan Southasian Coalition is organizing our next event next week on March 12th, Saturday. It's on Indian farmers movement, victory, and the road ahead. And a BSAC member will post the registration as well as the Facebook link on the Zoom chat. I will now, we will now start the Q&A session. So Bina and I will be moderating. Please post your questions in the Zoom chat. You can also raise your hand and our moderator will call on you and then please unmute yourself and you can ask your question. I will pass it on to Beena, who is our co-moderator. Beena, please.
Thanks, Pratyush. Those were really fantastic presentations, all three of them. A lot of information, a lot of nuance, a lot of food for thought, very thoughtful, all three of them, very powerful and very moving. And I think everyone who's watching this would be able to relate a lot of those things that they talked about to other parts, beyond what those specific geographical locations. So there is a question from TP Mishra to Kanak, in which he says that somehow we will continue to assume that New Delhi never got involved in this issue, actually, which Kanak didn't quite say, and he says that repatriation never became feasible for Bhutanese refugees. He's asking, do you buy into this, Kanak? And additionally, where and how do you feel the Nepali government failed? You're muted, Kanak.
If I understood Mr. Mishra's point, the 2 points he makes, I think I addressed both of them in my presentation. One is, as regards the Indian government, it was convenient for the Indian government to pass the refugees on to across the border from West Bengal into Nepal. Because New Delhi had various interests in Bhutan. One of them is Bhutan as part of the Himalayan rimland that keeps New Delhi constantly worried, especially after the 1962 conflict and the debacle, as I said. The other is Bhutan's smart diplomacy in New Delhi, which is really quite something to watch. It's almost like Delhi, Thimphu can do no wrong over the years. And as we know, New Delhi media, it's changing a bit now, especially with online media becoming more independent of handout journalism of South Bloc. But during the time that the refugees were in exodus out of Bhutan, being booted out of Bhutan essentially, during that entire happening and the decade thereafter, Indian media, when it came to foreign affairs, pretty much followed the dictates of South Bloc, the foreign ministry. And so there was a unspoken agreement in the media not to, except for a few renegade journalists, by and large, Indian media kept mum. And even, I think this continues till today. It's almost as if New Delhi journalists have, and I say New Delhi specifically because that's where most of the foreign coverage relating to India's foreign relations emanates from. It's almost like Bhutan is a small country on the side, a friend of India, a country that is useful for votes in the General Assembly as a automatic vote, so New Delhi thinks. And so we need to keep them happy and on the side, but no need to cover them, nor the refugees, too much. I feel that these two factors, the media's lack of interest in covering Bhutan and New Delhi's strategic interest. In fact, one of the comments in the chat box also refers to the alpha, that Delhi also had a need for Bhutan to crack down on alpha camps on the Bhutan side of the border. And so that also another reason New Delhi wanted to mollycoddle Thimphu. This is as far as India goes. And let me just say that when I mentioned the three factors that are required to on the refugee issue, accountability, reparation, and memorialization, the neighbors of Bhutan are morally bound, Nepal or India, to ensure that ultimately justice is done through these three features. On the Nepal government, I have said this in my presentation, the continuous political turmoil has kept Nepal preoccupied with its own issues till today, in fact, till this week, starting in the 1980s and 1990 when Nepal achieved democracy, and then went through a conflict period, 10-year conflict period, 10 years of writing a constitution, transitional period. What can I tell you? So for that reason, the bandwidth of the journalists and the opinion makers is taken up with internal affairs. And so the Bhutanese refugee issue has not got the kind of exposure and continuous interest of Nepali journalists. Besides that, the inability of Nepali journalists and opinion makers to sensitize the world in relation to, because why are Devendra Bhattarai and Kanak Dixit, both of them citizens of Nepal, speaking on a matter of Bhutan? That's because other than the Bhutanese refugees and Bhutanese citizens themselves, others are not interested enough to look at Bhutan with a critical enough eye, whereas the proximity for Devendraji and me to this issue makes us speak out. The last point I think I should just add as an additional point is, it's very unfortunate that this canker, this incredible blockage in relationship between Bhutan and Nepal has come up and stayed because the refugee problem has not been solved. Otherwise, Nepal and Bhutan make up the two Himalayan nation states of South Asia. And there are so many issues in which they have cultural affinity, they got geostrategic interests that may be similar, everything from climate change, receding glaciers, to issues relating to from urbanization to what have you. All the issues that Nepal has faced, Bhutan will face tomorrow. So there should be sharing of notes. And it's unfortunate indeed, this tragedy of the Bhutanese refugees has also meant a distancing of Nepal and Bhutan, Thimphu and Kathmandu, which doesn't do good to the people of either country.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the story of South Asia in a way. So what you said kind of reminded me a little bit of India and Pakistan also, and what they're doing with each other, what the states' policies, they're so full of ego and pointing fingers and blaming the other, right? That they never look inwards and see what can we do. It's always like the other side has done this, the other side has done that. And I find this whole thing so petty and so, I'm sorry to say, childlike and like boys with toys kind of a situation, you know, as the only woman in the panel.
Bina, may I add one point?
Yes, please.
Just the way when I reported on the Bhutanese refugees issues back then in 1992, when the refugee issue was burgeoning, but for a long time, and even till today, it's a tragedy that continues on unrecognized and in silence. An even greater tragedy, I believe, has been the one that has been dug up by Devendra Bhattarai ji, that there are political prisoners inside Bhutan, and with the yeoman's work, with the investigative work that he has done, picking up on work by others, but certainly he's the one who brought it all together and brought it before the world. You do not see that spark of urgency within South Asia, in the world, that there are scores of political prisoners as recognized by Amnesty and others, currently languishing in Bhutan jails. And again, you have to look at Bhutan, when there are so many number of prisoners, you have to look at it in relation to absolute numbers, but also in relation to the size of the Bhutanese population. And if you look at it in that way, this is a large number, but forget about relative numbers, just the fact that there are scores of prisoners and a little bit of recognition that you exist as a prisoner of conscience within any society. At least that's a kind of a salve, a kind of a, in Nepali we say, a malam, there's somebody at least looking out for you, even though you may not benefit from it. That is not happening.
No.
And even with this report that Devendra has come out with, and it has come out, the article is out there in English as well, and I hope to find it and put it in the chat, the Nepali Times article in English. The original, of course, was published with the support of the Center for Investigative Journalism, Khoj Patrakarita Kendra, in the Kantipur newspaper. But I feel that this is the syndrome continues. The syndrome where you saw no refugees, you heard no refugees, this situation exists. And even worse, because these are people actually incarcerated in jail in Bhutan as we speak.
Kanak, your point about that that South Asia doesn't pick up on this is something that we really that we missed in South Asia Peace Action Network when we did our session on prisoners. We left that out as well. So next time we do a session on prisoners, we need to definitely bring that in. There are a couple of other comments in the chat that about speakers. Can we maybe spotlight all the speakers? And there's a question from Somnath saying that I wonder if the speakers can deliberate the commonality between the citizenship acts of Bhutan and India. And I'll just read out a couple of other questions as well, just so that you have them all, all three of you can do that. And another question from Sanjoy Hazarika was actually meant for Aman about he says the Indian Minister of State for Home Affairs told Parliament last week that the total number of people declared as foreigners on December 31st, 2021 is 1,43,000 something. And Nityanand Rai also said that a total of 1,21,500 something have also been declared as Indians by the foreigners tribunals. And I'm just going to bring in one more point, and then I'll leave it to the three of you, which is to say something. Narayan Katel says if somebody could say something about the 30 Tibetan refugee prisoners said to be in Bhutanese jail, arrested during the K4 coronation in 1974. So since 1974, they have been in jail, 30 Tibetan refugee prisoners. And Kanak, to your point about not being recognized as the recognition of being prisoners of conscience is a kind of a salve, a malam or marham, as we say in Urdu Hindi. So I think all those points, if the three of you could talk about those.
I think I cannot speak for not an area of expertise. If I did some research, I could perhaps answer the question relating to compare and contrast the citizenship acts of Bhutan and India. As far as it's not so much as far as the refugees from Bhutan are concerned. I think it has more to do with the fact that the state decided now this large demographic category of Nepali speakers should be ousted. And then they just created conditions to oust them, basically. And the refugees have all the documentation. And what people forget when people think about, oh, Bhutan was probably awash with Nepali speakers, my research back then, talking to people who had just come out, is that the Bhutanese were pretty careful about who came in and kept the registers. And if labor was brought in, much of the laborers were, it was made sure that they left. The people who, I am quite confident in my conclusion from my research back then, which I have no reason to change my views right now, is that the absolute majority by far of those that were ousted were people who were considered citizens of Bhutan by the government Bhutan till the census was carried out in southern Bhutan in 1988. And suddenly the alarm bells rang, and then this process of ousting was begun. So I think that's all I have to say. I can't compare and contrast, as Mr. Somnath wants to say. I can't get there. As far as the Tibetan refugee prisoners are concerned, I think, yes, there was the previous king, the current king's grandfather, I believe, Jigme Dorji, had a Tibetan consort. And when he passed away, there was some tensions there to begin with. And there were the Tibetan refugees in Bhutan at that time. Yankee, I believe her name was. She was of Tibetan ancestry. And so there was bad blood. And these Tibetans, many of them were asked to go to Dharamshala or cow down. Around that time, there would have been prisoners. I don't know if many of them survived till now, but this is something for some journalists to dig into specifically. And Devendraji, do you have anything extra on this?
Yes, sir. I have read one report, is 2020 country reports on human rights practices of Bhutan. It's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor from State Department. It is written that since the 1960s, the country has sheltered Tibetan refugees who were initially located in 7 settlements. Tibetan officials reported that Tibetans had largely successfully integrated into society. According to the Central Tibetan Administration 2017-18 annual report, the latest for which information is available, 1,847 Tibetan refugees lived in the country, Bhutan. Approximately 1,654 of them had refugee resident permit. The Tibetan refugee population was decreasing as Tibetan refugees adopted Bhutanese citizenship according to the Department of Immigration. It is mentioned here, but as Narayan sir said, asked a question regarding the refugee and the political prisoner, Tibetan political prisoner. There is no report in this bureau, in this country report. So I cannot say more than this regarding the Tibetan refugee.
I think in which case, this is something important that Narayanji has brought up, and we must make sure that this is the issue of the Tibetan refugees within Bhutan is also covered. Of course, today we're not to talk about refugees, Tibetan refugees elsewhere, including in Nepal and the challenges that they face, but I think we've done it in a previous discussion. I wanted to, before passing on the mic to Aman, because I think there are questions to him and issue of NC's, the situation in Assam, I thought I might just read out a few, just one line. You see, within Nepal, there has been genuinely a kind of exclusivist state where the Brahmins and the Kshatris, the Baun and Kshatri, pretty much rule the upper echelons of governance. That's where they are. In that sense, it is not an inclusive society. It is important to say this because when the refugees came out, one thing that myself as a citizen of Nepal recognized was the incredible inclusion. The leadership of the refugees were cross-ethnic, because Nepali is only a language. The ethnicities and the castes, the leadership was cross-ethnic and cross-caste. And that was something that was very educational to me personally back then, I remember. And this is just one thing I wanted to read out. Look at the variety. If you knew some of your Nepali surnames, you'll know how broad this group is, because the Bhutanese government did try once to divide the Nepali speakers by caste and ethnicities as well. But here it is. One list of death in police custody, Bhutanese police custody of Nepali speaking activists within Bhutan reads thus: Chhatri, Sharma, Gurung, Limbu, Rai, Kami, Karki, Adhikari, and Pokhrel. Another list of rape victims during the time when the refugees were being created through a blunderbuss activity of the Bhutanese government. Another list of rape victims reads thus: Nuitel, Gurung, Rai, Sherpa, Chetri, Basnet, Guragai, Gotame, Sunar, Mogarni, Kharel, and Nirola. The leadership, Bhutanese leadership in exile includes Basnet, Burathoki, Chetri, Takal, Gazmer, Pradhan, Rai, Sharma, and Subba. I need not say more. I think we should pass the mic on to Aman.
Thank you, sir. So, more than the citizenship laws, I think what is important is the how citizenship cases are decided, the contestation of citizenship, which for me is very problematic. Yeah, we have been told since last 3-4 decades that there are 5-7 million illegal migrants. This perception, which has driven the politics in Assam for very long, and that has also become the reason to influence the foreigners tribunals, how they decide the cases. That is what need to be questioned, the adjudication of the citizenship. Like Sanjay sir has mentioned that 1,21,000 people have already been declared as an Indian citizen, 143,000 people have been declared as foreigners. My humble submission is that all these peoples, either people who have been declared as an Indian or foreigners, because I have fought their cases, I have fought more than 500 cases, and I say with all responsibility, none of my clients are illegal migrants. I have toured almost all these districts where people are accused of being foreigners. I did not come across one foreigner. I have campaigned for free and fair NRC, met thousands and thousands of people. I have not come across one people who does not have any document. So at the end of the day, it is Indian citizens who are accused of being foreigner, who are getting rendered stateless, getting detained in detention center. And this is because there is a prevalent perceptions that there are millions of illegal migrants in Assam. NRC has busted that perceptions. And that is exactly why the government is not accepting the NRC. And the government is telling people that, the number of exclusion is much lesser. Now, where do you find these people? You need to manufacture people, right? Even 1.9 million people, if there is a free adjudication of these cases, I tell you, there will be hardly anyone who will be declared as foreigner. The ultimate casualty is the rule of law. Rule of law, the basic values, the foundational values of Indian Constitution is overlooked to decide these cases. Report after report, jurist after jurist have spoken against this arbitrary deprivation of nationality. I think more than the citizenship laws, this entire adjudication process need to be questioned. That is my humble submission.
Thank you, Aman. I see Sanjoy Hazarika he's got his hand up. And Sanjoy, you wanted to say something about the question that you asked, Aman.
Hi, Bina. Hi, everybody, and Kanak, good to see you, and Aman also. I'm very much in agreement with many of the things that Aman has said, and what I was putting in the chat to him earlier and to you, Bina, was that a lot of this politics is driven by perception, but there is some sort of a reason why that perception exists, and that perception goes back to nearly a century ago. And, conditions have changed. Lines have been drawn. Nations have been created, but still the old perception remains. And that is why it's important to deal with these issues on the basis of rationality and logic. But unfortunately, whether it's in the Northeast or anywhere else, logic doesn't seem to have much of a role in politics. The point I want to make here is really related, and Aman would be knowing this. Recently, the Guwahati High Court actually ruled in a case where a person had been found to be a foreign. He ruled and said that this whole thing is ridiculous because his brother's an Indian, his father, his relatives are all in India. How can this chap be a foreigner? So we are not accepting this. So that has put a lot of pressure on the foreigners' tribunals to actually show some elementary diligence, and as Aman says, uphold the rule of law. Because if you look at the figures are totally, if you look at these two figures that they've put together of people who are found as illegals or people who've been found as Indian nationals, it doesn't even amount to 3 lakhs. That's over 30 years, okay? 30, nearly 40 years since the IMDT came into place.
What's the IMDT?
So in 40 years, you're able to find just that. I mean, so where is this huge influx coming from? We are not able to even find any evidence, even from the tribunal's records. You can't find with the way they've performed.
Yeah.
And it's a flawed
Thank you,
process.
Sanjoy. Thank you for reinforcing basically the points that Aman made earlier.
I mean, Aman and I slightly disagree on some things, but that's okay. I mean, the basic thing is that the rule of law has to be upheld. And I'm afraid it's very late here. It's 11:11 on a Saturday evening. So I'm going to say goodbye to my dear friends Kanak and Aman and Bina.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you for dropping in, Sanjoy. Thank you for dropping in. Pratyush?
Yeah, please go ahead. I mean, I think Aman probably would want to respond. Maybe.
Yeah, so see, I agree with sir that there is a history of more than a century, but at the end of the day, this, like I said, there's an entire exercise of accusing people of being illegal migrant. I have given example after example. The people who are being accused of illegal migrant. Of course, there were migrations. My great grandfather migrated from the place now in Bangladesh in 1870s. 70 years after that, India was partitioned. I read the figure of what Census Commission in 1931 said, that 500,000 people come there. Agrarian historian say that around 1 million people came there. Just because 20 years or 50 years down the line, India was partitioned, will you accuse those people who came here, who migrated just 300, 400 kilometers as illegal migrants? Just because their language are different, their ethnicity is different. And Bengali Muslims have also accepted the Assamese language. Today, in the lower Assam Bengali Muslim belt, if you go, you will not find one Bengali medium school. Bengalis are very touchy about the language. This is the community who gave up their language and accepted Assamese language, assimilated almost with the culture. Despite that, decade after decade, if you say that we do not accept you, you are not among us, and we will strip your citizenship, like I say, the ultimate thing is the rule of law, is the basic foundational value on which our nation was built, that every person should be treated with dignity, every person should be treated equally before the law. These are the foundational values which are under attack today. These are you cannot accuse people who came before 150 years as illegal migrants. What are the bases? Sanaullah was on duty as an Indian army for a counter-insurgency operation called Hifazat. And that person was accused of being illegal migrant. His thumb impression was forged. He submitted 26 documents. Give me 1 minute, I will explain. He submitted 26 documents. One of the document was issued by the President of India, by which he was appointed as the junior commissioned officer. The tribunal members say that this document is not acceptable because the issuing authority did not appear before me. Now let me break this down. The tribunal member, who is a lawyer of 10 years of experience, a contractual foreigners tribunal member, expects that APJ Abdul Kalam appear before her and say, oh, I have issued the document. 26 documents were submitted. These documents were rejected, and an army man who served in Kashmir for several years, served Indian army for 30 years, was stripped of his citizenship and beaten in detention center before we got him released. This is the story of lakhs of people.
Yeah.
Lakhs of people whose citizenship is stripped. Now, unlike as I heard to my other prominent speakers that people are migrated from this country to other country, here people can't go anywhere. This is the only country they know. Yeah. No country will accept them. Now, you are stripping your own citizenship, depriving of the rights. Tell me, is this really conducive towards the state? This is not helping anyone except politics except for certain political parties to form government.
Yeah.
Like I said, I repeat that the ultimate causality is the rule of law and the foundational value on which the Indian nation was built.
I think one more casualty is ordinary people. The like you said, the dignity and the rights of ordinary people. That's, as you underlined that. And I think that's another reason why we are calling for a visa-free South Asia, the South Asia Peace Action Network. We're calling for a visa-free South Asia. We are saying we should not have these kind of divisions. Keep your nation states, but to throw people out, let people work, live, marry across the national borders in the region. This is South Asia, we are talking about South Asia. Why can't we be like the EU? So, I mean, yes, it's a very long shot, and of course, it's not going to happen maybe in our lifetime, but we can.
Just one point I want to make.
Yes,
there are a lot of people who have said that people who have been stripped of citizenship should be given work permit. I understand your sentiment that there should be visa-free South Asia. Here we are taking away passport of our own citizen.
Yeah, exactly.
Passport of our own citizen. Forget about giving visa to making a
you
visa.
Can't give a visa to somebody who doesn't have a passport.
But here we are stripping citizenship of our own citizens.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a perception, Aman, that this whole NRC was done to target Muslims, but you're saying it's actually more than that.
See, I wouldn't say that the entire NRC was to target the Muslims. The number of Bengali Hindus and Bengali Muslims equally suffered, and the number of Bengali Hindus were actually more than the Bengali Muslims, because large number of Bengali Muslims, Bengali Hindus, they came during the partition of East and West Pakistan, and lot of Bengali Hindus were issued this something called refugee certificate, and those certificates were rejected en masse. So because of that, large number of Bengali Hindus were excluded from the NRC. But because of this large number of Bengali Hindu exclusion, CAA was brought. Now CAA will protect Bengali Hindus. Now Bengali, among these 1.9 million people, a lot of peoples will be in these 6 scheduled areas, which is exempted from the CAA. There are also the Bengali Hindus in these 6 scheduled areas. Now, not only the Bengali Muslims will have to prove their citizenship, but even Bengali Hindus who reside in these areas will also have to prove their citizenship. So I think it will be unfair to undermine suffering of any community, which is Bengali Hindus or Bengali Muslims. I think everyone equally suffered. But in these areas, which is under the CAA, Bengali Hindus will not have to prove their citizenship. But at the cost of what? At the cost of issuing an affidavit that I am an illegal migrant from Bangladesh. The people who have been excluded, Bengali Hindus excluded from the CAA implemented areas, are Indian citizens. I know a lot of people who are Indian citizens. They will be exempted from the citizenship exercise before the Foreigners Tribunal to prove their citizenship by saying that I am a refugee from Bangladesh and have been persecuted there, ignoring entire history that person is an Indian citizen, at the cost of your existence, at the cost of your history, most importantly, at the cost of your dignity.
Yeah.
That you are an Indian citizen, and then saying that, no, I'm not an Indian citizen, give me citizenship.
Yeah.
Tell me which community will be happy with CAA. Of course, they will get citizenship, but at the cost of the dignity, which is an inherent right confirmed by several Supreme Court judgments and the Constitution of India.
Yeah.
Bina, can I just add one thing to the points that you made and Aman made about, excluding people from, not just the dignity, but taking their documents, and although you might provide 30 documents, you might still be considered quote unquote illegal. It also impacts the Dalit landless who don't have documents, who go from one part of the country to the other. It impacts the migrant workers who are, who might be of Muslim faith or Christian, who are going from one part of the country to the other. Adivasis, similarly, transgender folks who have been quote unquote abandoned by their families also get impacted. So this is a draconian law that's going to impact a whole section of the population. And I'm glad that Aman has gone into so much detail in explaining that. And I also want to thank Kanak and Devendra for bringing out, there's this thread that Somnath pointed to that runs across this quote unquote citizenship, and how people who have been living in South Asia, like you were talking about, who have been moving around for hundreds of years before the states boundaries were set up, right? So it's really interesting that we have three presenters who are talking about this whole irony. So back to you, Bina.
I think we're kind of getting to the close of our time. I see Sanjoy has his hand up again. I don't know, Sanjoy, if you'd like to put your question in the chat or your comment in the chat, because we need to kind of end also. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything. I would just suggest put it in the chat, because otherwise it gets kind of, I don't know, what do you think, Pratyush?
Yeah, thank you, Bina. Yes, that's a good idea. I think we are way past our time that we had promised to our speakers. And I know that for Kanak ji and Devendra ji, it's way past the usual probably sleeping time. So it might not be very fair on them as well.
Yeah, so maybe everybody
it's not
could
fair
put
on
their comments in
any
the chat.
of us, but Bina, just give me a minute and I'll close. I'd rather not put it in chat. You know, there's a person all of us know, one of the founders of Bangladesh, Professor, what's his name? Soban, Rehman Soban.
Yeah.
Rehman Soban, I invited him to give a talk in Assam, and he said publicly, I accept that there has been migration in the 70s, but today that migration is changed. There's no kind that kind of migration doesn't exist anymore. And he said his speech is in the public domain. And he said that now people are changing. They're not coming to India anymore. They won't come to Assam. They are going to Southeast Asia and across the world, and you'll find them. Just as you find the Indian South Asian diaspora everywhere. So I think we need to be very clear that, you know, some of us have been working on this issue for about 30 years. We're not sort of somebody who's come into this over the last couple of years or couple of days. So there is a history that you need to recognize, which didn't stop with partition. We didn't stop with the 71 war. And that is the reason why perceptions matter. You know, so let's not just brush them aside. It's important to understand what the genie in the box is, because it's multifaceted. And I respect the work that Aman and his colleagues do, and I think they're doing a great job. And I think that the critical point here is, how do you weave a narrative that enables everybody to understand this in a far better manner, so that dignity and rule of law prevail? That's the critical, and human rights are respected. That is the bottom line. Thanks.
Agreed, Sanjoy. And I think one of the important points that Kanak raised about memorialization is, maybe one way to do that is to tell the stories of people, because that is what then is what influences the narrative. Because then how do we do that when the mainstream narrative is full of bigotry and falsifying of facts and all of that? So I think this is where the role of journalists particularly is very crucial. So thank you, all those who do that. And also I think it's important for people who now, like this, we have this so-called citizen journalist, everybody here has some access to some social media platform or the other, and to keep raising these issues and to keep telling these stories. I think Aman very highlighted so many stories. I think the story of Sanaullah, the Indian Indian army officer who was stripped of his citizenship, it's emblematic, like you said. This is just one case, and that came out only because he had some kind of influence and access and help, and you were able to get him out. And there are thousands and thousands of people who don't have. And like with prisoners across the board in our countries, in South Asia, and also in America, where some of us are, and probably around the world. The prisons are full of those who can't pay for justice because, and it's the poor and the underprivileged who get put into prisons, who get criminalized for things that people who are of a higher socioeconomic status get away with. Maybe, so I don't know, but I think that we need to close up now. If anybody has any last minute questions or comments, please do put them in the chat, because then volunteers can put them together and maybe share them with the speakers, and we can get back to you on the Facebook or via email, because I think there is a people who registered have the emails, we have them, right, Pratyush? So we can get back to anybody who has any particular questions or comments, and we can also put them in the Facebook, the answers of the people who spoke. And it is very late in South Asia right now. So Pratyush, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bina, for moderating. And thank you, Kanakji and Devendraji, and thank you, Amanji. It's been wonderful, and we see the connection of the people across South Asia and also the struggles of people all across South Asia. And Boston South Asian Coalition will continue to sort of engage with these issues, and we really appreciate that you participated. And we also want to thank especially the Nepali community who brought the Bhutan issue to our attention. BSAC has been very active on the CAA and NRC issue, but we also wanted to, it was wonderful that Kanakji and Devenji could provide that perspective, and BSAC will continue to work with all of you. Aman, thank you for really providing an in-depth understanding of the colonial nature of this Draconian law and how it's putting, it's killing people, it's putting people in detention centers, and the Boston South Asian Coalition will continue to fight that. One of the, we have put in the chat, one of the key struggles that has actually brought up some of the key issues facing South Asia, but a movement about the farmers in India. We have an event next week, and you can see the links in the chat. I also want to thank Bina for being such a wonderful sort of co-host and for bringing in this South Asian perspective. She's not only a very well-known journalist, but also a very ardent supporter of all struggles in South Asia. So thanks a lot, Bina, and please follow Sapan as well as BSAC on social media. So thank you, and good night in South Asia, and we will see you all at our next event. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pratyush. That was really, I think I sent you a message by mistake.